Hey, it's KR talking today about how truth is stranger than fiction, so that we know that narratives have a logic to them that the real world does not need to conform to. And yet, since there are coincidences and unbelievable incidents in the world, you can actually utilize those in your storylines. I don't know whether I would say this is to give it verisimilitude or a sense of reality, but since these things occur, they're so stunning when they do, or when we think about them, that when we have them in a story and it all makes sense, so that it seems unbelievable or it seems like a coincidence, but in fact, in the narrative, in the storylines of your world, it'll all add up to the players. So there's many, many examples of unbelievable incidents and coincidences in the real world. And what I'm going to do is talk about some of these and then talk about ways you can incorporate them into the storylines of your world such that the players say, oh, those make sense. So I guess this is 40 years ago. I don't know, in the mid 80s, there were, maybe it was late. I'll put it up on the screen when this occurred. We started hearing rumors around that Michael Jackson and Lisa Marie Presley were a couple, and that they were secretly married. And at that time, if you knew who Michael Jackson was and his persona, and Lisa Marie Presley, you just thought, well, this is the most ridiculous thing you'd ever heard. There's no way that this could happen. Of course it did. They got married. They were married for a while. And so people said, well, it's a publicity stunt. It's ridiculous. This could never have occurred. But she has claimed, and I think he did as well, but she has till she died, pretty much both of them died young, that they were really in love, that they really had a relationship, right? Well, if you had to, now again, this is tricky in a fantasy setting because who are famous people, but if you had a hag get together with a Prince Charming type character, right? Let's say a patriarch and a hag get together. They are a couple in your world. How is this? How can this be, right? Well, there's a couple ways that this could be. The hag is actually cursed. Like they're going to have this big wedding, let's say, and the whole kingdom is upset because this hag has clearly bewitched the prince or the king, let's say. And he says anyone who dares harm her will be, hung or whatever. And the players are just assuming that there's some kind of mind control. But as it turns out, she is cursed, and she's actually this princess or, this person that's worthy of the king. And he knows that this is a curse, but he knows he has to go through with this in order to break this curse. Now, this is the sort of thing, again, the players, when you're showing this, they're going to make all sorts of assumptions because they know this can't be true. A hag and a king cannot truly be in love. And if you present it that way, they just fell in love. These crazy kids, they just love it. It's not going to go, right? We're not going to believe that Lisa Marie Presley and Michael Jackson are going to have a relationship. We're not going to believe that the king and the hag are going to have a relationship, but, there's a reason for it. And when the reason all makes sense and the players, they might then realize, because there might be a force saying, we are going to stop this. We're going to blast her. And he doesn't want this to happen, but he can't say anything as part of the curse. See, so that's what you're doing. You're creating a backstory, which in the end is perfectly reasonable. Because here's the thing about real people. They act irrationally. They act against their own interests. They act in ways that makes no sense. But if you put that into a narrative, people bump up against it. They don't like this. Unless you're doing some psychological, Crime and Punishment is the classic novel about this young student who commits this stupid murder. Sorry about plot spoilers. And it makes no sense, right? Why would he do this? Well, Dostoevsky, the writer, shows us his mental processes and stuff. He has another famous book, The Underground Man, where he talks about this. And it's really great. It's super penetrating psychological insight into why this person would do something that's so stupid. But in an RPG setting, that's tricky to do. So let's take someone super good, like a patriarch of some city, and some character goes in and stabs them or attacks them or does something and goes on the run. And the players are tasked with finding this person or bringing them back. And everyone says this person has gone crazy or something. Let's put it that way, the crazed sort of thing. So they go get them. But in fact, this patriarch was actually evil. Or this patriarch was not what they seemed. They had been possessed. I mean, there's something going on there such that the psychological torment of this that caused this person to do this is then going to make sense once they catch up to this person. But it's got to be some act, like, some character or some NPC that the players have known for a while and then does something crazy. And it does turn out that they had something in their past, or they had something that drove them crazy, not just mind control or something. Those are the easy D&D-esque things. And again, I'm just putting these in here as ideas, that you can make things that don't make any sense, which ordinarily would just be this person is tormented by psychological problems. But in a fantasy setting, they have to have narrative logic. So another weird event that is more recent is at the Oscars when Will Smith got up out of the audience and slapped Chris Rock across the face. And everybody thought, well, is it a stunt? Is it a gag or something? It was real. He was mad because Chris Rock was making jokes about his wife. And it hurt Will Smith's career and all that. Chris Rock, of course, got a routine out of it, but whatever, he didn't appreciate it. So let's suppose you have a ceremony. Like, let's say the druids all gathered from ceremony, and the players are invited. They know some druid. I'm just using this as an example. And these two have a little bit of a feud going on. And the Grand Master or whatever, and this other druid mocks the Grand Master's ceremonial attire. And everyone realizes he does look a little ridiculous. Well, the Grand Druid gets really mad, and he turns into some animal form. And so the other Druid turns into one, and they have a sort of battle royale right there. And all the Druids sort of take sides, and you have this epic riot going on. And what do the players do? Do they intercede? Do they run off? Do they what? And suddenly this whole thing has caused this ruckus. And then as the players investigate, they find out, just like with Will Smith and Chris Rock, this Druid had a history of making fun of the Grand Druid or whatever, because he felt slighted that this guy got this position and he didn't. So he was always insulting him. So even though you don't set it up, you just have this going on and suddenly this occurs. Why the hell would this happen? It has to make sense. And it did make sense why Will Smith slapped him. But it was also totally unbelievable. Here's another one. There was a fit of laughter that broke out. It began in a schoolhouse in Tanzania in the early 60s, and then it spread to the whole village, and people could not stop laughing. And it was a mass hysteria once this started. It wasn't like ergot poisoning that used to happen in the Middle Ages to people. This was just mass hysteria, they think. I mean, again, there's theories that there was some kind of gas from a nearby lake, but it really wasn't. So what if you have this kind of thing where a town is convulsed in unstoppable laughter, and they're just on the ground, and they're not operating the town. They're not able to, they're not eating. They're not sleeping. This whole thing is happening. The players are going to say there's some kind of curse here, a spell, some effect that's happening to these villagers. And when they see this, they're going to try to get to the bottom of it. And it's not just mass hysteria. It's not just this started and people, because you see this in religious ceremonies and things where people begin speaking in tongues or convulsing, and it spreads throughout the crowd. And you think, they're faking it, right? If you watch something like that, like a video, no, it's real. Mass hysteria is a real phenomenon, but it's bizarre. It's unusual. Now, it has a reason for being, but in an RPG setting, this kind of thing, we think of spell, curse, something like that. If you want to make it, in the end, it's mass hysteria. I mean, the mass hysteria of the witch trials, right, that happened to people. And there's all sorts of societal reasons why that occurred at the time period that it did, as opposed to earlier periods when people believed in witches and whatnot. We think today, no one believes in that. But there's mass hysteria, all sorts of things in societies. And they seem, in retrospect, unbelievable. There's also the rule of large numbers, which can often create coincidences. So some classic coincidences. Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, both signers of the Declaration of Independence, both the final survivors of those signers, died on the same day, July 4th, 1826, exactly 50 years after the signing of the Declaration. Now, what are the odds that these two guys would be the last two to survive, would die on the same day, and that same day happened to be July 4th on the 50th year anniversary? That's highly unlikely, but it happened. So how do you use this kind of a coincidence with such meaning in an RPG world? Well, you have somebody predict this. Somebody predicts that this is going to occur, that these people are going to die on the same day. But what you have is some meaning to it. You have this prophecy that if these two figures die on the same day of this anniversary, something bad is going to happen, right? It fulfills some prophecy. And I don't know whether the world's going to end or the demons are going to break through the plane of whatever. You can set this up. But some misfortune is going to occur. But let's say they're young. They're young and they're going to die on some select anniversary of the misdeeds of their parents, right? And the players know this. So something must be right. It's some wrong, some event. And you can use the signing of a peace treaty, which was then violated. And so the curse is each generation, let's say, on the anniversary of this, someone dies, or both sides were, even though the one side got screwed over, they were duplicitous, whoever signed this treaty on their behalf. And so now the players know this. So you're using this historical quirk of two major figures of world history dying on this day, but you're making it make sense. It's not just a coincidence. It's actually something that prophesizes something. And there's another classic coincidence in the construction of the Hoover Dam. The first fatality was a guy named J.G. Tierney, who died in 1922 as they were first starting to build the Hoover Dam. And then it was completed 13 years later. And the last fatality in terms of the construction was his son, Patrick. Patrick Tierney killed. It's a pure coincidence. It's real. It happened, right? And, if you put that in just in a story or whatever, we don't believe that, but it really happened. But in an RPG setting, you again have this prophecy or whatever that says that when this thing is constructed, I wrote a short story like this for my Patreon to use as a story idea. But once some task, in this case, it was a great wall. Once the great wall has been completed and the last stone is put in, something's going to happen. Some calamity, some event, so instead of tying it to, because when it was first started, when the first stone was put in, some person made this prophecy. Let's say that it was to divide these people off from the civilized world, and their high priest said, if you build this wall, this will happen when you finish it. And now we're getting close to completion. And there's all sorts of rumors, and there's all sorts of people are very nervous. They think something bad is going to happen. And you're, as an RPG, fantasy player, going, "Oh yeah, something bad's going to happen here," right? So this is based on a coincidence of history, and now you're turning it into an event that makes sense in story as a narrative. Now I'm at a roll. I'm going to do one more of these coincidences because they're so great. So the Titanic is the most famous, shipwreck of all time, for modern times at least. And in 1898, there was a guy who wrote a book about a ship. It's called Futility, and it's about the biggest and most glamorous luxury liner of its day, and it was called the Titan. And on an April night, it hit an iceberg and sank. And this, of course, this was 1898, and the name the Titan, and there were famous people, all this, the glitterati of society on board, and all these people were dying, and then they didn't have enough lifeboats. I mean, it just mirrored the Titanic. No one thought it wasn't that popular of a book. But then when the Titanic sank, people looked at this book. Of course, this guy had nothing to do with that. Increased his sales significantly, right? He was famous from then on, a little bit of fame. Well, what if you have a book that is going to foretell some incident and the players find this, or the players hear about this, or whatever, and there's something in this book, there are clues to find something that will prevent, again, is it a catastrophe? It probably has to be something pretty major that's going to occur. It's got to be something that, like, wow, that's deadly. And I don't know, you can decide what this is. But you're basing it on this book that was written where this person had a vision and they wrote this book seemed to write itself, right? That kind of thing. And the players find this book, then they might just find it initially and not quite know what it does. And then as they investigate, they begin to piece together that this visionary, this prophet, had written this book, and it said it foretold of some event. And in the book, now again, he just wrote this in 1898. There's nothing that predict when the actual Titanic is going to sink. So maybe there's clues in there about that. Is there a power to the book? I think it's just a power. He had these visions of the future that he laid out. Maybe it was automatic writing, right? You do see mystics that will do that. They go into a trance and write automatically. And he wrote this whole story in an automatic trance. And now events are happening and the players begin to discover, maybe there's a few that have already happened when they read this and you tell them, just the plot outline, but it's something really bad. Something that's going to happen. And then the players are tasked, whether on their own initiative or, by somebody else to figure this out, solve it if they can. And that's the way that you can take these unbelievable events. And there's many of them. You look this up. Though another famous one, I'm just going to mention this because it's so crazy. This kid, 17-year-old kid driving a moped in Jamaica, I think Kingston, Jamaica, gets hit by a taxi and killed. And a year later, his 17-year-old now brother, he was 1 year younger, so it's a year later, riding on the same moped at the same intersection, is hit by a taxi, same driver, and the same passenger in the taxi, and killed. And people the people write into Snopes and all this, but they've looked it up, it was in the newspapers, and it's been verified, they know who the people were. It's just a coincidence. Total coincidence. But if you put that in a book or a movie or whatever, we won't believe it. We'll just say no. It's not true. It can't be true, but it is. So instead of just saying, well, I can't use those, no, justify them. That person the person in that taxi had ordered this accident to occur, and it was the wrong person. It was the wrong brother. So a year later, they did it again on the year anniversary, because it's the year anniversary of when that brother made a reckless decision at 12 or 13 or whatever it is, and that's a kid, so maybe like when they were 16, and killed this passenger in this taxi's brother. See how it goes? You're thinking of a plausible reason to create this, because the players won't believe it, right? They won't believe that this could happen, that someone could be killed like this, the brother, on the same day. They're going to look at that passenger and go, what's the deal there? That would be my thing. So again, that's the sort of thing you do, because truth is stranger than fiction. Fiction must follow logic, but you can use these bizarre events and these weird coincidences to create really compelling narratives. And a shout out to my Patreon supporters this week. I did the hut. I came up with these huts, architecture, the little simple hut. Really neat, some ideas for that. Thank you guys for your support. Thank you for watching the channel. Please subscribe. Give me a like. Give me a comment. Have you ever tried to use these kind of bizarre coincidences or historical events in your own world? And of course, keep playing an RPG game, whichever one you choose, and tell somebody else about it.